Chasing feels natural when you care. It feels like action, like love, like responsibility. Your mind tells you that if you just explain one more time, clarify one more misunderstanding, or show how patient you can be, things will finally settle. But for an avoidant, chasing does the opposite of what you intend. It doesn't feel like reassurance to them. It feels like pressure. And pressure triggers their deepest fear, the fear of losing autonomy, of being engulfed, of being required to show up emotionally before they feel safe doing so. That's why the more you lean in, the more they instinctively pull away. Not because you're too much, but because their nervous system is overwhelmed. Stabilizing yourself changes that entire dynamic. Stabilizing is not silence as punishment. It's not disappearing to make them panic. It's the decision to stop outsourcing your emotional regulation to someone who isn't wired to carry it. When you stabilize, you slow your reactions. You stop sending messages driven by anxiety. You stop trying to manage their emotions or predict their next move. Instead, you ground yourself in what you can control: your breathing, your routines, your standards, your self-respect. This shift is subtle, but it's powerful, because avoidants are highly sensitive to emotional intensity. When the intensity drops, their nervous system finally has room to breathe. What most people don't realize is that avoidants reconnect when they feel safe, not when they feel convinced. You cannot argue an avoidant into closeness. You cannot logic them into vulnerability. Safety comes from emotional steadiness, from a sense that being near you won't come with expectations they can't meet. When you stabilize, your energy changes. You're no longer scanning for signs of abandonment or over-interpreting silence. You're no longer waiting by the phone. That calm presence is what creates contrast. Suddenly, you're not the source of pressure anymore. You're the place where pressure doesn't exist. This is where the real shift happens. When you stop chasing, you stop reinforcing the avoidance belief that closeness equals obligation. Instead, you demonstrate something entirely different. Closeness can exist without control. You show that you can hold your emotions without handing them over. And that's deeply disarming. Avoidants are used to partners escalating when they pull back. When you don't escalate, when you remain steady, respectful, and emotionally contained, it creates cognitive dissonance. Their nervous system expects pursuit. When it doesn't happen, curiosity replaces fear. Stabilizing also means stabilizing your sense of worth. Chasing often comes from an unconscious belief that connection must be earned through effort, patience, or self-sacrifice. But when you stabilize, you stop negotiating your value. You don't prove, you don't persuade. You simply exist as someone who is emotionally available but not emotionally dependent. That balance is rare, and avoidants feel it immediately. It signals maturity. It signals choice rather than need, and choice feels safer to them than need ever will. Over time, this steadiness begins to rewire the dynamic. Without pressure, the avoidant has space to notice their own feelings. They start to miss the ease you brought into their life. They remember how grounded it felt to be around you, not because you demanded anything, but because you didn't. That's the paradox. By stabilizing yourself, you stop trying to pull them closer, and in doing so, you quietly make closeness possible. Creating space sounds simple, but most people do it in a way that backfires. They go silent with resentment in their chest. They pull away while secretly watching their phone. They call it giving space, but underneath it's a protest. Avoidants feel that immediately. Even when nothing is said, the emotional charge is loud. And to an avoidant nervous system, that charge still feels like pressure. Real space only works when it's clean. When it's not meant to teach a lesson, trigger guilt, or force a reaction, clean space begins with an internal decision, not an external behavior. It's the decision to stop orienting your emotional world around someone who is currently unavailable. That doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop hovering. You stop measuring your worth by their responsiveness. You stop keeping one foot in the relationship and one foot in self-protection. Instead, you step fully back into your own life. Avoidants don't feel safe when they sense they're being monitored emotionally. Clean space removes that sense entirely. Punitive distance feels cold. Clean space feels calm. Punitive distance has an edge. An unspoken, you'll regret this. Clean space carries no threat. It communicates without words. I respect your need for space, and I respect myself enough not to chase. That combination is powerful because it doesn't activate the avoidance defenses. There's nothing to fight against, nothing to escape, just room. And room is what allows an avoidance nervous system to downshift. Most people underestimate how deeply avoidants associate closeness with loss of freedom. When space is given with resentment, it reinforces that fear. It tells them, if I get close, I'll be punished when I can't meet expectations. But when space is given cleanly, it sends a different message. Closeness is optional, not demanded. That message alone can soften walls that arguments never could. Clean space also shifts you out of a reactive posture. You're no longer withdrawing in hopes they'll chase. You're withdrawing because your life is full, grounded, and moving forward. You're not waiting for them to notice the silence. You're not curating absence as a tactic. You're genuinely present elsewhere. And paradoxically, that authenticity is what makes the space effective. Avoidants are extremely sensitive to inauthenticity. They can feel when space is strategic. They respond when it's real. His kind of space changes how you show up if and when they reach out. There's no emotional backlog, no unspoken accusations, no pent-up disappointment waiting to spill out. You can respond with warmth instead of relief, curiosity instead of interrogation. That emotional cleanliness matters. Avoidants reconnect when the emotional cost feels low. Clean space keeps the cost low. There's also something deeply self-respecting about this approach. You're no longer trying to control outcomes. You're not using silence as leverage. You're choosing alignment over attachment. That choice stabilizes you. And when you are stable, you stop sending mixed signals, wanting closeness while bracing for rejection. Stability is grounding. It makes your presence feel safe even in absence. Over time, clean space does something unexpected. It allows the avoidant to feel the relationship without the noise. Without pressure, they can finally sense what's missing, not in a panicked way, but in a reflective one. They notice the absence of your calm, your warmth, your steady presence. And because that absence wasn't weaponized, it doesn't feel threatening. It feels honest. That honesty is what quietly opens the door to reconnection. Living loudly without explaining is one of the most misunderstood shifts in this entire dynamic. Most people hear it and think it means posting excessively, performing happiness, or trying to make someone jealous. That's not what this is. Living loudly is not about volume on social media. It's about depth in real life. It's about turning your energy back toward yourself so fully that your life becomes rich, structured, and emotionally nourishing, without narrating it to anyone who has chosen distance. Avoidants are highly attuned to emotional subtext. When you explain yourself, justify your growth, or announce your progress, it often carries an invisible message: I need you to see this so you'll come back. Even when your intentions are pure, that need leaks through. And to an avoidant nervous system, that feels like another pull, another expectation, another reason to stay guarded. Silence paired with visible consistency, on the other hand, feels neutral. And neutrality is safe. When you live loudly without explaining, you stop trying to manage how you're perceived. You don't need to clarify that you're okay. You don't need to send updates about your healing. You don't hint that you're moving on. You simply do it. You show up to your life, your work, your body, your friendships, your goals with focus and rhythm. This creates a grounded energy that doesn't seek validation. Avoidants feel this shift instinctively. It registers as independence, not detachment. There is also something deeply regulating about this for you. Explaining keeps you tethered to the outcome. It keeps one eye on how they might react. Living without explanation cuts that cord. Your growth becomes yours, not a message. Your joy becomes private, not performative. That internal shift is powerful because it changes your emotional posture. You're no longer bracing for rejection or hoping for recognition. You're simply building a life that feels good to inhabit. For avoidants, this is disarming. They expect intensity or withdrawal, protest or performance. When they see someone who has quietly expanded their life without needing an audience, it creates a different kind of intrigue. It challenges the story they often tell themselves, that closeness always leads to dependency. Your behavior shows the opposite. It shows that connection with you does not erase individuality. That proximity doesn't mean loss of self. And that realization can only happen when you stop explaining. Living loudly also means being consistent, not dramatic. It's waking up at the same time, taking care of your body, following through on commitments, laughing freely, making plans, showing up fully in conversations with others. This kind of consistency is incredibly attractive to an avoidant because it signals emotional maturity. It says, I'm not destabilized by distance. And that steadiness reduces their internal resistance. Another subtle effect of this shift is that it removes emotional hooks. When you explain, you leave openings for debate, reassurance, or misunderstanding. When you live, there's nothing to argue with, no narrative to dismantle, no emotional thread to pull on. You become self-contained, and self-contained people feel safe to approach because they don't demand completion from someone else. If the avoidant is observing from a distance, and many do quietly, what they notice is not your happiness, but your wholeness. They sense that you're not waiting, that your life is moving forward with or without them, and paradoxically, that's what makes them curious again. Not because they're afraid of losing you, but because they realize being close to you wouldn't require losing themselves. Living loudly without explaining is not a strategy to get someone back. It's a decision to stop shrinking your life around someone else's comfort level. And when you make that decision sincerely, you shift the entire emotional landscape. Reconnection, if it comes because it feels natural, not because you asked for it. Being predictable without being constantly available is one of the most counterintuitive yet powerful shifts you can make with an avoidant. Most people assume that availability builds closeness, that being ready at all times proves care and commitment. But for an avoidant nervous system, constant availability often reads as pressure. It creates the feeling that someone is always waiting, always watching, always expecting something in return. Predictability, on the other hand, creates safety without demand, and that distinction changes everything. Predictability is about emotional reliability, not access. It means your tone is steady, your behavior is consistent, and your boundaries don't fluctuate based on anxiety or hope. When you say you'll respond later, you do. When you say you're busy, you don't over-explain, you don't disappear dramatically, and you don't suddenly become hyper-present. This steadiness makes you easy to understand. Avoidants relax when they don't have to decode emotional signals. Consistency lowers their guard because it removes surprises that feel like emotional ambushes. Constant availability, however, keeps the emotional door wide open in a way that feels intrusive to them. When someone is always reachable, always ready to engage, always prioritizing the avoidant, it subtly communicates, I'm here whenever you decide. That imbalance creates discomfort. Not because they don't care, but because it places an unspoken responsibility on them to regulate your closeness. Predictability removes that burden. It says, my life has structure and you are welcome in it, not the center of it. This approach also shifts how your time is perceived. When your availability is limited but consistent, your presence gains weight. You're not scarce in a manipulative way, you're simply engaged in your own life. When you do show up, you're present, not rushed or needy. Avoidants are far more likely to lean in when interactions feel intentional rather than default. Predictability allows them to anticipate connection without feeling consumed by it. There's also a self-respect component here that can't be overlooked. Being constantly available often comes from a fear of missing a chance. If you don't respond now, they might pull away forever. But predictability is rooted in trust. Trust in yourself, trust in timing, and trust that real connection doesn't require immediacy. When you honor your own rhythms, you model a healthy relationship to time and attention. Avoidants notice this. It feels mature. It feels grounded. Emotionally, predictability soothes the avoidance nervous system because it creates a sense of control without dominance. They know what to expect from you, which makes approaching you less risky. Unpredictable availability, sometimes instant, sometimes withdrawn, keeps them on edge. They don't know whether closeness will be easy or emotionally expensive. Predictability answers that question quietly. Closeness with you is calm, measured, and respectful. This balance also changes how you respond to their outreach. You're not jumping the moment they text, and you're not withholding to make a point. You respond when it fits naturally into your life. Your warmth is consistent, not performative. That consistency builds trust over time. Avoidants don't reconnect because of grand gestures. They reconnect because repeated interactions feel safe enough to sustain. On a deeper level, being predictable but not constantly available helps you detach from monitoring their behavior. You're no longer checking for signals or overanalyzing response times. Your life runs on your schedule, not their attention. That internal shift is palpable. It changes the emotional energy you bring into every interaction. You're calmer, clearer, less reactive. And that emotional clarity is exactly what makes you easier to reconnect with. Predictability creates a stable bridge. Limited availability keeps the bridge from feeling crowded. Together, they send a powerful message. Connection with you is reliable, but never overwhelming. And for an avoidant, that message is often the first one they feel safe enough to cross toward. Responding warmly without responding immediately is a quiet form of emotional leadership. It requires restraint, self-regulation, and trust in yourself rather than in urgency. For someone with avoidant tendencies, immediacy can feel overwhelming even when the message itself is kind. When a response comes too fast, it can signal vigilance, someone waiting, anticipating, holding space just in case. That subtle energy can activate their instinct to betray. Warmth paired with patience, however, creates a completely different experience. It feels safe, unpressured, and grounded. Warmth is not enthusiasm that spills over. It's not excessive reassurance or emotional intensity. Warmth is steadiness in tone, kindness without demand, openness without urgency. When you respond warmly, you communicate that you're receptive. But when you delay just enough to stay aligned with your own life, you also communicate that your emotional world isn't on standby. That balance matters. Avoidants are sensitive to the emotional cost of interaction. When the cost feels low, they're more likely to stay engaged. Immediate responses often come from anxiety, not intention. They're driven by the fear of missing a window, losing momentum, or appearing uninterested. But avoidants don't interpret quick replies as care. They often interpret them as expectation. The unspoken message becomes, "I'm here and ready whenever you are." That can feel like pressure, even if no request is made. By slowing your response slightly, you remove that pressure. You show that connection can exist alongside independence. This doesn't mean ignoring messages or playing games. It means responding from a regulated state rather than a reactive one. You finish what you're doing. You check in with yourself. You choose your words calmly. When your reply comes, it feels composed and genuine. That emotional composure is contagious. Avoidants mirror the emotional tone they're met with. Calm invites calm. Warmth invites closeness, without panic. There's also something deeply respectful about this approach. You're respecting your own time and theirs. You're not assuming immediate access to their attention, and you're not offering unlimited access to yours. That mutual respect creates an even playing field. Avoidants often pull away when they sense imbalance. When one person seems more invested, more available, more emotionally exposed, warm but unhurried responses help restore balance without confrontation. Over time, this pattern builds trust. When every interaction with you feels easy, consistent, and emotionally light, the avoidant begins to associate you with relief rather than obligation. They don't feel the need to brace themselves before reaching out. They know they'll be met with kindness, not interrogation, with presence, not pressure. That predictability lowers their defenses more effectively than any emotional appeal. This approach also protects you. You're no longer riding the emotional highs and lows of their outreach. Your nervous system stays regulated. You don't spike with hope when they text or crash when they don't. Your responses come from stability, not anticipation. That stability is attractive, but more importantly, it's sustainable. It keeps you grounded regardless of outcome. When warmth replaces urgency, something subtle happens. The avoidant has space to lean in at their own pace. They're not reacting to your speed, they're responding to your presence. And presence, calm, kind, self-contained presence, is what creates the conditions for reconnection, to grow naturally, without force or fear. Detaching from the outcome is the hardest shift because it asks you to let go of control where you've been seeking certainty. Most people say they want reconnection, but what they're really chasing is relief from uncertainty, from longing, from the fear that they were not enough. When your emotional state is tied to whether someone chooses you, every interaction carries weight. Every message becomes a test. Avoidants feel that weight immediately, and it pushes them further away. Detachment lifts that weight. Detachment does not mean indifference. It means you stop making your peace contingent on someone else's decision. You allow yourself to want connection without needing it to feel whole. This inner separation is powerful because it changes the emotional energy you bring into the dynamic. You're no longer subtly asking them to resolve your anxiety. You're no longer scanning for signs that confirm hope or rejection. You're present, but not attached to a specific outcome. Avoidants are drawn to people who feel self-contained, not closed off, not cold, but grounded. When you commit fully to yourself, your life gains momentum. Your goals matter again. Your routines stabilize. Your sense of identity expands beyond the relationship. That expansion is felt. It creates emotional gravity. You become someone who chooses connection rather than someone who needs it. And that distinction is everything. Outcome attachment often shows up in small, unconscious ways, overthinking response times, replaying conversations, adjusting your behavior to provoke a reaction. Even when unspoken, these patterns create tension. Detachment dissolves that tension. You stop trying to influence how they feel and focus instead on how you live. That shift makes interactions lighter, cleaner, and more authentic. Avoidants respond better to authenticity than to strategy. Committing to yourself also means honoring your boundaries. You stop over-giving to prove value. You stop tolerating ambiguity that erodes your peace. You make decisions based on alignment, not fear. This doesn't push people away, it filters them. And avoidants, despite their distance, often respect boundaries deeply. Boundaries signal clarity. They show that closeness with you won't require emotional chaos. There's a paradox here. The moment you stop needing reconnection is often the moment it becomes possible, not because you've withdrawn love, but because you've removed the pressure. When you're okay either way, your presence feels safe. You're not asking them to fill a void. You're offering connection as an option, not a demand. That optionality is soothing to an avoidant nervous system. Detachment also protects you from self-abandonment. You stop bending yourself into shapes that might keep someone comfortable. You stop delaying your life in case they return. You reclaim your agency. Whether they come back or not, you move forward intact. That wholeness is not only attractive, it's necessary for any healthy reconnection to last. In the end, the quietest trigger is not something you do to them. It's something you do for yourself. When you choose yourself consistently, calmly, and without resentment, you become emotionally safe. And emotional safety, not persuasion, not persistence, is what gives an avoidant the courage to step back toward connection.